Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
I think IoT is a concept like the internet was before it. And so I think people are thinking a lot about how they can contextualize the technology into today's life. But I think it's going to lend itself to paradigm breakers down the road. And I know what I just described is very conceptual, but frankly, I think that's where the big value, the killer app, if you will, is going to come from the IoT space. Is going to be a few years from now still, but it's going to come when you can have that multi-layer connected environment that makes these use cases much more intelligent and efficient.
What's the IQ of your city? There's a few ways to raise it to become a smart city. The bottom-up approach starts with a few IoT pilots to see what sticks and what the operational implications are. The top-down approach looks at the city as a platform, providing interconnectivity. In this episode of the IoT Business Show, I speak with Miguel Gamiño, San Francisco CIO, about his approach to make his city the smartest of them all.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is made possible by sales of my book, IoT Inc., published by McGraw-Hill, and the IoT Inc. Certified IoT Professional, or ICIP, online training and certification program. Become a certified IoT professional by completing the program's 3 courses: ICIP Technology, ICIP Business, and ICIP Strategy and Digital Transformation. Details of which can be found at www.iot-inc.com. That's www.iot-inc.com. With me today on the IoT Show is Miguel Camino. Miguel serves the city and county of San Francisco as its Chief Information Officer and Executive Director of the Department of Technology. As San Francisco's CIO, Miguel provides thought leadership and the strategic direction for San Francisco's use of technology, including IoT. I introduced Miguel on stage at Internet of Things World and enjoyed his keynote. So here he is. Miguel, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So what's the latest IoT initiative you've been working on lately?
So we recently completed, through a partnership with Sigfox, the deployment of a citywide dedicated IoT network. And then after kind of making sure that the network infrastructure was available, we did a series of kind of working events that led ultimately to some ideation around kind of the thematic needs of the city related to IoT, and then used those to host a hackathon with some key sponsors that led to the development of some prototype solutions against those themes that had been identified.
Yeah, that seems to be like a trend now. So the idea is that you set up a hackathon, you give the hackers some goals, and you just sort of let them loose and see what happens.
Yeah, and I think there are really good use cases or scenarios for hackathons and other scenarios that are better suited to some other sort of private sector engagement models. But in this, because it's so early on, I think, and people are really genuinely trying to establish even the art of the possible, I think it was a really good approach to just saying, hey, here's some issues that we've got, some themes of need. How would you approach them, with this sort of base technology, but not much more constraint or overly specific direction than that. So it was really interesting to see them really take hold of the technology and deliver some different thinking around how we might address some traditional or kind of pervasive civic issues.
So what's the timeline then? You said is the network's in place. Is it operational yet, or I guess that just defines on what you're going to do with it, or where are things?
So the network is operational. The network is up and running and available. The use cases, most of the use cases are still being developed, even those that were kind of the winners or the bright spots of the hackathon are still being developed. I mean, this is still very early going. And so, a lot of that work is still happening.
And what's the timeline then? What's next? When do you think you'll have your first service up and running?
I don't have a specific timeline. I would say, there'll probably be some early implementable versions possibly in the next year, but those are mostly driven by the departments that are now directly engaged with some of these folks around how to address some of these needs, and some of them are kind of more simple and straightforward, and others more complex. So the timelines also kind of vary because, like I said, those problem sets were really broad and thematic. They weren't super specific. So some people, went after much bigger goals, and others a little more narrowly focused.
So maybe you can give us an example or two of some of these themes that you're discussing here, you're bringing up here.
Well, I mean, I think generally they were around the bigger pain points. So energy, and more specifically water, has been an issue in California and lots of places around the country and the world. But so that rose as a highlight. Also, things around transportation, and just safety, mostly in that regard, also kind of floated to the top. And so the hackathon produced three winners, mostly in those areas. One was a moisture sensing solution that could help us be smarter with irrigation. So basically watering the turf when the turf needs it, not when we think it does.
Sure.
Another was around using sound signaling at the street level. And you could correlate that with some other data sets to use the sound signals to identify the need for example, maintenance of the fleet in our public transit system.
Interesting. Okay.
And then the third one was a bike GPS kind of locating solution, which is an interesting one to think about, because on the surface it's like, okay, we're going to be able to track bikes, and that has a value statement. But I think there's some deeper learnings that can occur when you understand at scale how bikes are moving around the city. It could certainly inform the way that we design streets and the other modes of transit as they kind of move, as we understand how people are moving around. And I'm not a street planner, so I'm not going to pretend to get into the depths of the philosophy. But my point being that when we provide these other data sets and ability to kind of inspect how people are using that sort of infrastructure, then those people that are geniuses in that area can make even smarter decisions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it makes a lot of sense. I don't know if San Francisco has a bike sharing service, but that would be something obviously under the city's control. And so you could say, well, then you need to put these hyper or these steroid GPS systems on the bikes. And then, then it gives you lots of data to make the city better in a lot of different ways.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Miguel, why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about yourself and specifically, some of your background in IoT.
So I come from private sector, startup world. I had started a couple of companies, and was on a break and got talked into doing my civic duty by the city manager of my hometown of El Paso, Texas. And she convinced me to come in and work for the government and help transform the way that they used technology and more tangibly the operations of the IT department, to modernize it and help it be more responsive. And so I did that. She talked me into it, and I did it, and I'm glad she did, because I learned a whole kind of different perspective about the mission-driven people inside government, and have a whole new respect for people who are committed to civic service. And so while I was there, I got recruited by San Francisco and have found all of the same things, and then some. And so we've been really working hard to transform the way the government consumes technology for the benefit of the public. And along the way, again, I've just found a lot of people really focused on doing great work and trying to be innovative and creative and efficient, and really broke a lot of the paradigms or the stereotypes that I had when I was kind of outside looking in. And so it's not without challenge. I mean, there's certainly a lot of things that need to be improved or just flat fixed, but I found a lot of people, really talented people, trying to do really good work.
Yeah, and that's something I picked up of when I was on the sidelines watching your presentation. Just this sense of mission. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way you said it, and it is different priority than obviously the private sector. But I enjoyed, and we'll get into it in a few minutes, but I enjoyed kind of your perspective on how to use IoT to improve the lives of the citizens within the city. So it seems like it hooked you, and you're still there then.
Yeah, and my startups were cloud service, network infrastructure type businesses, and so and we also built some digital service type consumer facing products. But so I've got kind of a mutual respect for the plumbing that's required to make things work securely and efficiently, and frankly, just to be effective and sustainable. But also a respect for, that these, all of these systems and all these investments in technology, whatever label you place on it, it all has to work to benefit the customer or the end user, in this case, the public. And so I've been able to have this kind of straddled position about being really aware and an advocate for the unpopular investments sometimes in infrastructure, and at the same time maintaining this hyper focus on usability and the end user experience, and the fact that at the end of the day, all these things need to add value to the lives of the public we serve, or else they're not really valuable. So that has been a very interesting situation, to be able to kind of bring both of those perspectives and have them match up really neatly in an environment like a municipal government, where both of those things are our responsibility, and they both really matter, and they are very much codependent.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. I mean, I like that. So adding value to the customer, in this case, the citizens. Let's start with the basics. In general, what are the top 5 areas, or 4, whatever areas, where you're seeing IoT being used to benefit within an urban environment?
Well, I think again, we're still in early days, right? So I think IoT is a concept like the internet was before it, so I think people are thinking a lot about how they can contextualize the technology into today's life. But I think it's going to lend itself to paradigm breakers down the road. And we're talking about, we recently we didn't win, but we put forward what I still believe is one of, if not the best, smart city strategy around transportation. And this concept of using autonomous shared vehicles citywide to change the way people move around, and just the concept of mobility. And a lot of it was going to benefit from or be made possible by this kind of hyper-connected environment where these inanimate objects, these autonomous vehicles in this case, could talk not only to one another or interact with people, but also could communicate or be aware of other inanimate objects in its kind of surrounding environment, right? So being able to be aware of all of those different moving parts and the ability to crunch and aggregate and crunch data to make decisions smarter and quicker is pretty profound. And I know what I just described is very conceptual, but frankly, I think that's where the big value, the killer app, if you will, is going to come from the IoT space. Is going to be a few years from now still, but it's going to come when you can have, that multi-layer connected environment that makes these use cases much more intelligent and efficient.
So what other types of, so you mentioned, that makes sense. So having smarter transportation and interfacing with this environment. What are the other components then of this entire system besides transportation? What would it be connecting to?
I mean, it could all still be transit related, but it could be that cars are aware of pedestrian crossing signals or aware of bike traffic, right? That we, like this other app that we just talked about. They could be aware, it could be connected to audio signaling or weather sensing and other temperature kind of environmental sorts of impacts, right, or situations. And so you could start to aggregate all that and understand better what, when are pedestrians likely to be congregating around a particular intersection, and could you divert traffic in a completely different route when you can predict that is going to occur, or bike traffic, and how would that affect, or would you be able, you could think about it right now. We stripe streets, and those stripes are not very easily changed, right? To redesign a street traffic pattern takes a whole lot of effort, both on the planning and engineering side of it, the decision-making side, but then also on the execution, to pull up stripes and to put down new stripes, and the disruption that occurs to traffic patterns, even just to accomplish the new striping. And at that time, you hope you made a good decision because it's, again, hard to change.
Yeah.
Whereas if you had this connected fabric of vehicles, they wouldn't be following the stripes, right? They could be communicated to and say, at this time of day, this street needs to be one way because, patterns dictate that that's most efficient. And at a different time of day, it's a two-way. And you couldn't do that. We've tried to do that with movable barriers and things like that.
Yeah, like on bridges and so forth.
Yeah, but it's still a heavy lift. And if all of these cars were speaking to each other, and you knew that all of the vehicles knew when a road was one way or two way, then you could start thinking about paradigms completely differently, and you could change things on the fly that you can't do today because of the constraints that we have. And so I think IoT is an opportunity to really think differently about those problem statements, and just think about what is the, kind of removing some of those barriers and adding some of these opportunities. You might solve some, very old problems very differently.
So it sounds like you're taking the approach, or San Francisco's taking the approach, more of a moonshot approach in giving, a little bit of breathing space to think freely. Is that the case, or do you have any short-term goals or actually objectives that are committed to before these, driverless cars, striping? I never heard that term before, but striping the streets or virtually striping the streets, these are a little bit longer term. What about shorter term? Or do you have any deliverables that you're kind of on the hook for, or is it still pretty much big thinking phase right now?
Well, the exciting part is the big thinking phase.
Sure.
Probably, truthfully, the most impactful or the more immediate kind of seemingly mundane things that really could often have the biggest impact, ironically. And so, for example, we've got one project that's been worked on. We have these cisterns, these underground big pods of water that are there holding water on the for the occasion of another massive earthquake. And when water supply lines get broken, that's what leads to historic fires that can't be put out.
Okay.
And so the city learned its lesson a long time ago and decided to put these pods of water underground at different places around the city. The problem is that in the case of an event or even just on ongoing maintenance, we don't really know without walking around and physically checking them whether they're still holding water. Have they been compromised? Did they break, leak? That sort of thing. And it's been otherwise really expensive to try to digitize that or put sensors in all of those cisterns across the city relative to like the occasion that it's needed, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, that sort of mundane kind of problem statement becomes completely different when the cost of this sensor capability dramatically drops, and all of a sudden it does pencil to put sensors in all these cisterns. But I guarantee, as run of the mill as that might sound, or uninteresting as that might sound, I guarantee you that if an event were to occur and a firefighter knew whether or not there was water in that cistern on their way to the scene, and that knowledge ended up, impacting our ability to put that fire out and potentially save lives and property, all of a sudden that doesn't sound so boring anymore.
No, it's a big deal at that point.
So those are, not necessarily moonshots, but they're also the kinds of things that could have real life safety kind of impacts.
So transportation makes a lot of sense. First responder, this is one portion of it. What are some other areas that you're seeing will make a big difference?
Well, like I said, water and just energy in general. So,
okay.
Just smarter use of water. I think we've seen significant reduction in water use in San Francisco, just in general. And so, to continue that trend, I think IoT and data-driven decisions will help kind of squeeze out even more efficiency in those conservation efforts. Energy in general, lighting and electricity, I think there's a lot of talk about smart lighting grids, and we're certainly thinking a lot about it. Some plans to pursue it. Nothing super specific I can talk about at the moment, but generally speaking, our PUC, our Public Utilities Commission department, is thinking a lot about how to be smarter with lighting systems and lighting control and all of those sorts of things. And then just, I think, general public works projects also have a lot of opportunity in this area, whether it's more efficient use of public works equipment and vehicles, or service scheduling for things as day to day as trash pickup and maintenance and those sorts of things. I mean, being able to make those decisions smarter leads to more efficiency, and that makes us not only better at it, but potentially spending less money to do it.
Hey, you kind of remind me of a recent trip. I was recently in New Orleans for my sister's birthday, and a bunch of us were there, and we're noticing the Big Belly. So the Big Belly compactors, these are IoT, for listeners who aren't aware, these are IoT garbage bins, I should say, and they compact, and then they communicate when they're ready to be picked up. And it makes a lot of sense. But it seems like you're almost all or nothing with these, because then we walked a little further down Bourbon Street and we saw regular trash cans. And so it's like, it's almost like you have to be, don't you think, Miguel? It's like for something like this, obviously, if only 1/10 of your trash cans, you know when to empty them, and the other, the rest of them you don't. I guess maybe it's just for experimental purposes, but it just dawned on me when we were there. We're talking about it to people who didn't really know much about IoT, and it's like, well, yeah, but you have to be kind of all in for this stuff to really come together.
Well, I think you do get exponential benefit when you can have like an all-in implementation. But I don't think people should be afraid to pilot, because I think part of it is you've got an existing workforce and set of systems that are designed around a certain scenario, right? And so I think it's also very smart to try to understand better how these innovations impact the organization. I mean, because some of it is really obvious, right? Like, okay, if I have all my trash cans communicating to me, then I can send trash collection only to the cans that are ready to be picked up.
Yeah.
That's the part that's obvious to everybody. What's not so obvious to anyone other than a public works director is, how does that change your labor scheduling? How does that change your actual vehicles design and maintenance schedules? And how does that change how you might even place the trash cans? Do they still even need to be in the same spots? Or do you need as many of them or more of them? Or and if you changed some of those things, what would the calculus be to the downstream impact, again, back to the workforce or the equipment and budgets and service response? So there's this super organizational impact that is real. So I think it's very responsible to have a pilot and understand how it what is the kind of domino effect, positive and negative, and then be prepared to implement the rest of it, organization wide, because you could have really good intentions and implement new technology and then find out, oh, my whole vehicle fleet isn't the right design or whatever, and now what, right?
Yeah.
So I think lots of cities are experimenting with these different things, not just to validate the obvious part of the use case, but to also understand better the less obvious impacts that it has.
No, that makes sense. And something that comes to mind also, Miguel, when I'm thinking about this, if there's any IoT deployment where it makes a lot of sense, where the different systems communicate with each other, it's within a city environment, and we kind of alluded to it in a couple different ways here. But just using the trash pickup as an example, how are you as a CIO ensuring, or are you ensuring, that the different IoT pilots that eventually will become systems within the city are going to be able to communicate with each other? Or is that just sort of too far down the road? You're still working within islands and not really thinking about it? Because there's certainly technical implications to this and economic ones as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't have unilateral control over all of these environments. I have citywide purview over technology, and certainly am responsible to drive the citywide technology strategy, but I don't own it. The decision making process unilaterally. There are a lot of people citywide that are involved and contributing to that, and so it's a much more contributed to kind of approach to it. So, but I think the benefit is that we can have a deeper understanding of the non-technical impacts of some of this stuff. So kind of the appreciation for what I just described in terms of the organizational impact of some technology innovations, I think, is important, because if it were just me and my own lens and I was just pushing really hard on the technology side of the equation, like I said, I could have inadvertent but real downside impacts to the other side of the equation.
Yeah, the behind the scenes stuff that you're talking about in terms of scheduling and fleet management and the rest of that. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm just thinking, I understand that there's a lot of constituents involved. There's a lot of players involved here. But at some point, you would think, for example, just communication between platforms. So there's going to be platforms that are, now we'll dig a little bit into tech here, but there'll be a platform that's going to be developed or used for different systems. And ideally, just trying to make up an example on the fly, if the utility organization that's picking up the trash is somehow related to, I don't know, finding potholes on the road, I'm just making this up, then it'd be really nice if there's some sort of communication between the public works trash and the public works road repair, whatever that's called, utility, so that, again, it's this data that we've been talking about, but it really is a communication of this data and getting the data to the right place. So that, to me, implies there does need to be able to take the full advantage of IoT, there does need to be a little bit of top-down strategizing on this. Or I guess maybe that's just not practical.
Well, I think that's going to be situational from one org to another org. I mean, for us, it's some of the value statements and objectives are top down, but a lot of the methods and implementation is very matrixed. So we have a lot of effort going on right now across the city with regard to our data consumption strategy. And so led by our data officer, she's really driven really well into this culture of, we really need to be sharing this data to make better decisions. And I think everyone, and I'm back to my original point of, I think there's a lot of good people in government. I think most people want to. It just hasn't been very easy. And when you're forced to choose between, what you're responsible for and maybe a more conceptual greater good, human nature may be to gravitate to make sure I get my job done. But as those things become easier or technology makes them more practical, I think we're finding a bunch of people that really do want to impact a bigger benefit. And so it's coming around, and there is benefit for sure to a certain amount of top-down decision making. A lot of times that can lead to things happening much faster. I think the benefit of having lots of input is it may not be as fast, but it might be better because it's more informed. And so I think striking the right balance of those two is the kind of the sweet spot.
That makes sense. And I'm just curious, how aware are the different departments or different, different departments within the city? How aware are they of IoT, and are they all kind of thinking about IoT and how it can help what they're doing, or is it still a learning process right now?
Well, I think it's a learning process for everybody. I don't know that anyone, even the experts, have it figured out yet, or else they would all be selling me the killer app, right? But I think we have a high degree of awareness across departments compared to most other cities, maybe. And I think that our approach to building this network and then inviting all those departments to think about these problem sets and that early engagement help bring some more awareness to it. And these use cases that I'm describing are now being driven by at the individual department level. I'm not centrally driving these and imposing them on people. The cistern use case I never would have come up with on my own. Right. But the department did, because they know better what their problems are. And so, I think we have really solid engagement. Now, it can always get better, and I expect that it will get deeper and wider. But we currently have a high degree of engagement from departmental folks.
So, Miguel, how would a startup or a company with a great idea, how do they get involved? What's the process? Is it again going department by department, or is there a bigger plan in place? But you mentioned a hackathon, which I think made a lot of sense to go after those goals that you had, the missions that you were talking about. But just in general, I guess I'm thinking a little bit broader in terms of the ecosystem and in terms of the business model. But ideally, San Francisco would have a platform, and that platform, we can overload the term, and each of us can have different, understandings of what that word means. But at a high level, there would be a platform that you would allow, or that you would encourage both private and public to be able to contribute to, or is that too pie in the sky right now?
I mean, so we have the beginnings of that. I mean, I don't know that it's like an online platform you can just plug into with an API. Mm-hmm. There's this endeavor is still largely hardware based. So, but Sigfox is open for business. The network is open for business. So startups who want to get into this are welcome to contact them if they want to, come at it from the technology approach, or they can contact us or a department of particular interest if they want to come at it from the use case approach. We, generally speaking, and of the extra thing that I think we're thinking about in San Francisco is also creating this ecosystem of a strong IoT fabric, so that startups that want to get in that business would start those businesses in San Francisco, and to perpetuate the San Francisco being the tech mecca.
Sure.
And so IoT being one of the next kind of waves of technology innovation, or just evolution, we have an extra reason, I guess, to make sure that we've got a vibrant, IoT environment. And so that's so. My point is, even if you're building a system that is maybe a commercial application, something that would never even be, valuable to a government, mm-hmm. we're still interested in you coming here and using the ecosystem we've built to develop those solutions too.
And maybe what's the ecosystem in particular? What are you referring to?
So Sigfox built the network city.
Okay. They've
got their chipset and a toolkit that they make available, I think, to startups, and so that companies with particular ideas can build those ideas on their chipset platform and their network connectivity platform.
Okay, and now that's obviously going to be for one very specific use case. Now, what about other connectivity models such as cellular, or maybe even Wi-Fi hotspots within the city? Are you doing something similar there? Because Sigfox and LPWA networks are going to be for very specific type applications.
Yeah, I think they're for specific kind of layers of the problem sets, but I don't think they're super use case specific. I think what I saw developed on the Sigfox network was fairly diverse. But to your question, yes, we're also working hard on citywide Wi-Fi. We've got a Wi-Fi program that we call SF Wi-Fi that has really good service up and down Market Street, 33 parks, all of our city libraries, mm-hmm. and we're working on expanding that. And if someone were to want to build a use case using Wi-Fi networks, we would be interested in hearing about it. Cellular is maybe the other end of the spectrum because it is private and commercial, and mm-hmm. Other than them using our rights of way, we really don't have the same kind of partnership that we do with Sigfox, or the same kind of ownership that we do with our Wi-Fi network. So But all those things are certainly available in San Francisco, and I expect them all to continue to grow in parallel to one another for different applications. I think Wi-Fi might not be the most efficient way to do sensor array communication, but low frequency or low throughput networks are not the best way to deliver rich media applications that may or may not be technically considered IoT apps. But so I think it's a matter for sure of picking the right tool for the task.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I was getting at. Just, there'd be different characteristics, bandwidth, whether that is multimedia or it could be bandwidth for whatever else. But I'm interested, has IoT become a political issue yet? And when I mean political, I mean, is it driving is it part of any political agendas, or is it still bottom up? Is it still technology driving it versus, I don't know, the mayor driving it, for example?
Well, I mean, to the extent that these, the transit IoT applications, to the extent that they can drive, safer streets and still, we have our Vision Zero to eliminate pedestrian fatalities and, those sorts of things. To the extent that the technology can aid and contribute to those efforts, then absolutely they rise to that level. The Smart City the grant challenge application process that we went through, it garnered attention from elected officials, business leaders in the community, education institutions, industry. It got a lot of attention from a lot of people because I think it identified so much potential to drive against multiple priorities, right? So it could make streets safer, it could move people around easier and faster and cheaper. It had positive impacts to environmental concerns, positive impacts to real estate use, all sorts of kind of multimodal on the impact side too, drove a lot of interest from a lot of those different players. So I think it's case by case. I don't think anyone is using quote unquote IoT as a part of their political platform, because that doesn't, again, that's not meaningful to the user. What's meaningful to the user is the application and the impact. And IoT might be a technological approach to making the life in San Francisco better, but it's the fact that you make life in San Francisco better that is a political agenda item, if you will.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. So, what about you personally? What's your pet IoT initiative that you think would make a big difference and that you would really like to have happen?
Well, I don't know if I have a specific IoT initiative. I think my focus areas are on connectivity more generally speaking. Mm-hmm. So IoT is a subset of my focus. I really am driving hard on this concept of connectivity to every home and business in San Francisco and free public Wi-Fi in all of our public spaces, and at a very significantly high capacity. So I want gig speeds everywhere. And I think that when you have connectivity become an automatic, become a ubiquitous fact, then I think going back to what we were talking about, some of the moonshot conversation, I think a lot of those approaches and solution development significantly change. All of these really cool generational impacts that have been developed by the likes of Uber and et cetera, they all depend on connectivity, and they never could have been built had LTE not become kind of almost automatic. And so I think that when the next level of connectivity becomes automatic, we're going to see a whole new set of things we can't currently imagine, because the environment will lend itself to that. So I'm really driving hard on this bigger picture of connectivity infrastructure. It's a global concern. My colleagues all around the world are similarly concerned with how to make their communities hyper-connected and have that connectivity be a given. And then ultimately, all what sits on top of that is what I talked about a little bit before around the concept of this digital service and digitizing government. And I think that becomes the great equalizer. I think that when you start digitizing the way the government delivers its service to the community, you can get at people when and where they want it instead of forcing them to engage with us on our terms, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 at City Hall. Mm-hmm. And the people that need those services that we get a lot of investment from taxpayers very intentionally to deliver specific programs and benefit to the public. And I think we're going to be a lot more effective at that when we can meet those people when and where they need it and drive, better outcomes when we can change the engagement platform. But that again depends on, connectivity being available so that people who might not even be able to afford it can engage with us in that, more efficient, modern way. So I know that's big picture, but that's what I'm focused on, is driving to a connected San Francisco and then using a connected San Francisco to digitize the way we engage with our public to drive better outcomes.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, and it makes sense, the connectivity really is foundational and for IoT to work, you do need that connectivity. And it also explains, I guess, the Sigfox, deal that happened because it's all about another form of connectivity. So, yeah, makes sense. Well, Miguel, where can people find out more about you and the city's initiatives in IoT, maybe even how they can participate? Is there a hub? Is there somewhere we can point our audience to?
So, our website is an obvious place, and we're actually working on a better kind of coordinated presence online that'll come out soon. I personally am very active on social. So okay. I'm on Twitter, SFCityCIO, regularly, and that's not a bot; it's actually me. And also on Facebook and LinkedIn, of course, and have recently started writing about some of these concepts on Medium. So at Miguel Camino on Medium as well.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we'll put all this in the show analysis notes so people don't have to kind of memorize it. But it was a pleasure. Thanks for sharing a very unique perspective. You're the first, well, I guess definitely the first CIO from a city that's kind of spoke at this level. And I think it'll be really useful for the audience. So thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. That was a great talk with Miguel. This podcast goes vertical, deep diving into different topics each week. If you prefer a more horizontal and structured approach to learning IoT business and its orbiting technologies, check out my book IoT Inc., published by McGraw-Hill, or become a certified IoT professional by completing the ICIP training and certification program. For details, just go to www.iot-inc.com. Also go to www.iot-inc.com for an analysis of this episode, links to things that were mentioned during the episode, and very importantly, the episode's PDF transcript. Just search for the name of the episode or the guest. If you're new to this podcast, subscribe. That way you'll get every week's episode delivered straight to your device. Or, if you've been listening for a while, there are 3 ways you can support the show. You can leave a rating or a review on iTunes. Just go to iot-inc.com/iTunes. It only takes 1 click to leave a rating, a little bit longer to leave a review. You can share it on social. I'm on LinkedIn, to a lesser extent on Twitter. And of course, you can support this show by buying my book, IoT Inc., or the ICIP training and certification program. It's how I pay the bills. Next week's episode is Exposing the True Nature of the Robust IoT Cloud with Dan Collins of ThruTech. I hope you can join me then. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Until next week, may your path to IoT business be a smart one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.